Hello, Dr. Brant Hulsebus here, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Chiropractor. Ask the Chiropractor is my little podcast that I do. When someone has a question about chiropractic or chiropractic care, I try to answer. I'm a chiropractor here in Rockford, Illinois. I'm a proud graduate of Palmer College of Chiropractic, and I'm happy to be the team chiropractor of the Rockford Ice Hogs. Let's dive into it. Welcome to another edition of Ask the Chiropractor. Last week I did a talk about GLP and blood sugar and stuff like that. Many of you came to me and asked me questions about your student athletes. You had questions about my student does this sport. What are some things I should know about my kids? Because we talked about the adults. Now we want to talk about the kids, the teenagers. And as a chiropractor, I don't tend to know everything, but I tend to try to find people who do. So I'm over here today with my friends at Movement Fitness. You can catch me here every Tuesday and Thursday morning if you ever want to work out with your doc. But we wanted to come over here and talk a little bit about it from the people who study this stuff in and out. So I want to introduce Coach Mason and Coach Justin. And maybe you guys could tell us a little bit. I know you have a big event coming up, which we could definitely, everyone's invited to come to it. So I want you guys to tell me a little bit about this drive to find this nutrition for kids first.
For sure.
What led you to look into nutrition for the student athletes?
Here's what happened. We have a lot of parents that bring in their athletes and they want us to help them get faster. They want to get stronger and play better for sports. And that's really great. But the second question that always comes is, by the way, can you help my athlete with nutrition? Can you help them understand how important it is for them to eat well and the fuel? And so the answer is yes. And it started for us a couple years ago. We did a quiz for some of our athletes coming in, and it was about 130 students that we had that summer. And what we found was just asking some simple questions. Did you come in the morning session? Did you drink water before you came here? Did you have anything to eat? If you came from a practice to this training, did you have anything to eat in between? And we have some really good athletes, and we have some great parents that are supportive and helpful, but the answers were crazy to us. Like, they didn't have any water before they came in. They weren't eating anything. And so they're not fueling themselves for success. And that was a real challenge. And so I wrote a book about this because I wanted to help just provide a guide point for parents and athletes and even coaches to provide some directions. Because what we know is nutrition will fuel performance, but it will also help athletes to reduce the risk of injury and also help them in the case that they do get injured to recover better. And that's what Coach Mason talks a lot about, is helping our athletes to reduce that risk of injury, but also coming back from an injury.
Yeah, so when coming back from an injury, nutrition, hydration, and sleep as well are some of the key factors that can really reduce the amount of time and the occurrence of those injuries. So it can turn those 2 to 4 week injury, if we're dehydrated, that can turn that into a month-long injury or even 2 to 3 months. So it can really affect that timeline of getting back on the field and can affect how many times that we're occurring or how many occurrences of those injuries that we're experiencing.
And because of that, we talked to Dr. Brant as a partner of ours, and we're like, look, we want to get more people in and help them understand what's happening. So we have an event next Tuesday at 6:30 here at Movement Fitness, 580 South Perryville Road. And our goal is to be a place and provide information for both parents and athletes, because here's what we know. Parents want athletes to eat better. They want them to eat healthier. They want to make sure they're getting their protein and we're hydrating and doing all the things. But what we also know is while we have 2 to 3 hours or so a week with high school and middle school students, the rest of the time, they're under the control of their parents. And so the challenge is we want to help to make sure that parents know, hey, this is what we should be fueling with, but also to challenge in the sense of, if there's food in the house, it's probably going to be eaten. So how do we clean up the pantry? Make sure that the choices that we're providing for our athletes are better. So it's not just one way to say, hey, athletes, you need to eat better. We also need to make sure that we're allowing them to have the best options at home as well.
And during your presentation, I'm sure you had lots of different topics, you talked about it, you're asking them if they drank water before they came here to work and exercise. Topics like, I read your book, obviously. There's going to be topics, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I have a weekend tournament, I know some of these, they go away for the weekend, they got 2 games on Saturday, 2 games on Sunday, and a championship one at that. What do we do in between? Parents ask me that all the time. How do I keep my kids fresh and ready to go? and even after practice. I know for me, when I played football, water was a treat. If we didn't screw up for half an hour, we were given water. And I worked with USA Football to teach coaches that's not right.
No.
Water is very important, and I think we've seen a turnaround of that. But can you hit a little bit of these topics? We don't have to talk a little bit about some of these ideas, and so I'll pass it back.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of things with tournaments, but one thing that we're going to talk through in particular with Coach Mason in terms of injuries is how important, not only when we think of training, we think of muscles and how do we help get faster and stronger, but also we're training for tendons and ligaments and things like that, and hydration has a big deal to do with that.
Definitely. So our ligaments, they're made 2/3 of strictly just water, and then the last third of our ligaments, they use that water for the elastic ability. So it's really important for a ligament to be elastic, because if it's not, then it'll just snap. And no one wants to deal with torn ligaments or tendons or anything like that.
Yeah, my father always described ligaments and tendons like onions. There's lots and lots of layers to them. And when you tear them or you injure them, a lot of times people hear a torn ligament and they think they have to go get a surgery. No, you just rip some of your outer layers of your onion and it tries to grow back together. And I talk in the office all the time about the importance of making sure that you give the building blocks that it needs in order to heal. And there's special considerations, correct, when you're talking about someone that's teenager that's not done growing yet.
Definitely, yeah.
Absolutely. So that's part of that. Those are things that we don't normally think through. But in terms of tournaments, and we know that club sports has continued to grow, and we know that weekend tournaments are going to happen, week-long tournaments happen depending on what age you are. So the challenge is how do we fuel for that? And the goal is there's different factors, because we don't know if we're going to play at 8 a.m., we don't know if we're going to play at 2 p.m., we don't know if we're going to play the game an hour after that, or we're going to wait 6 hours in between. So I outlined this a little bit in the book, but I outlined it quite a bit, I should say. But trying to provide some options for people to understand what to fuel with. And I think the challenge is for us when we look at club sports, when we're going to these tournaments, if we're trying to compete at a higher level, it's not a vacation. So we need to actually think in advance and go, how can we prepare for what's going to come? Because we don't know where we're going to be. We could be in the middle of Iowa, we could be in Chicago, and different places have different food options. And we don't want to leave it up to chance to where we're going, whether we're going to be able to refuel ourselves or not. So if we're going to go to those tournaments, we want to take them as seriously as possible. Obviously, we still want to have fun, but being prepared and going, we'll just go grab a pizza in between, it's not really going to fuel your daughter or son for their next best performance. So we want to make sure that we prepare them for that. Another thing we know that people struggle with is if we are playing the 8 a.m. game, that means we have to have the kids there by 7. That means they have to get up by 6, which means they have to eat something by 6:30, and then you're fighting your kids. And you go, you know what? There are a number of different ways that we can help to fuel in the morning rather than just having a full meal or to force them to do something or to have nothing at all. So that's part of the deal, is structuring that to think, like, how are we actually fueling ourselves and preparing? And if we can do something the night before to help them set themselves up, and maybe a snack in the morning, there's different options that we can do with that.
Then you're going to try to give them the tips. Like I know a lot of times as a parent, you go to these weekends, and there's always that one mom and dad that plan every meal at restaurants that you would never take your kids to at home because it's not the best, healthiest choice, but they want to go there to hang out and think it's a fun. But you're thinking about, I got to take care of my kid, and even like you said, breakfast.
For sure.
There's always that egg-like substance in the hotels they serve, and the pancakes and the waffles and all the cereal and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But you're going to help us correct with, maybe we can bring a cooler and have some stuff with us and have some alternate choices and how to navigate that.
I know also too, the challenge with tournaments is we've faced it and gone through it, and the challenge is it also costs a lot. Right? So it's another way for us to make sure that we're fueling efficiently, but also not just consistently going out and spending money. And I know there may be times like, hey, the team's going out for a dinner or going out for a lunch or whatever, and we can work around that. But we also want to make sure that we are prepared the best as possible so that we can help them fuel for performance, but not also just have money flowing out of our wallets constantly.
So that's going to be October 15th.
October 15th.
6:30 here in Rockford.
Yes, sir.
And if you want to attend that, you can go to my website, you can go to the Movement Fitness website, social media pages. I'll put some links after this, so wherever you're listening or hearing this. And then another note, I'm happy that many people outside of Rockford listen to my podcast now. So I'll put links how to get the book in case you live in Kentucky and you don't feel like driving all the way here next October 15th to learn some of this stuff.
For sure.
I'm going to make the book available to you too. Coach Mason, any final words?
Not only are we preparing for our high peak performance, but we want to leave these athletes not vulnerable when they're out on the field. So that's going to be the key for nutrition and hydration as well.
Coach Justin, final
Absolutely.
words?
Look, I think this is a bigger deal, and parents know this, but it's going to take time and effort. And so our job is to help to continue to educate. It's not perfection, but we want to continue to put steps in place, because what we know is what we're doing now for our athletes is going to be a part of their long-term plan, and we want to help to prepare them as best as possible to not just reach for the pantry, to not just go for the fast food place because it's quick and convenient. We want to make sure that it also helps them to set up patterns and habits in their lives that will allow them to fuel themselves for the rest of their lives to be successful.
Awesome. If you have any questions or anything you want to ask, you can always leave a comment below wherever you're watching or listening to this. And if you have a question for Coach Justin or Coach Mason, I promise I'll forward it on. Like I said, I'm here 2 or 3 times a week doing my thing anyway. We'll be happy to share that information with them, and they can get back to you too. Other than that, thanks for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe, and check out Movement Fitness. You'll see the links I do to them all the time. You can find more information about them too. Thanks, guys.